Hello, and welcome to Deep Learning Leaders. My name is Eric Landau, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Encord, the data development platform for AI teams. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Stephen Piron, founder and CEO of Pickford AI, an AI company that is reimagining entertainment. Stephen is a serial entrepreneur, previously co-founding running one of the original deep learning companies, Dessa, who he later sold to Block. He has had quite a history in AI, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, Stephen, for joining me today.
Thank you. Hi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so I was really excited to talk to you because you've seen the kind of full AI journey from Dessa now over to Pickford, but I wanted to start even earlier than that and just kind of hearing your story of how you ended up starting an AI company in the first place, because I know that you had some other companies that you were starting, you worked at a hedge fund, so it'd be good to just get up to speed of your history in professionally.
Totally. Okay. So I was living in London and I moved to London to work at a hedge fund. Um, I did quantity stuff at a hedge fund.
I know how that is.
Yeah, tried to make models and write bad code in Python and stuff.
I also know how that is. Yeah.
And then I did that for a little while and then um, did a startup in the UK, sort of in the early days of like the old street. Sort of there was like a buzz around 2010 or something,
Yeah.
um, uh, and it didn't really go anywhere. It was sort of like for a bunch of reasons it sort of fizzled out after a while.
I, I'm curious, maybe just on this point, because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily AI related, but how how did you know that it wasn't going? Like, at what point did you kind of feel that?
I mean, I came from like the world of sort of high finance where there was like loads of data,
Mm,
and the idea for the startup was um, there was more and more data about startups,
hmm
and you could sort of maybe quantify it and maybe find some signal in it. And if you look at sort of the returns of like traditional finance versus the returns of venture capital, they're very different, and the returns of venture
hmm
capital are in aggregate actually quite bad. And maybe
hmm
that's because the data was so spotty, and they weren't using it at the time. So it was an incredibly hacky scraping machine that scraped all of the sources you can think of: Twitter, Crunchbase, LinkedIn, when these things were more easily scrapable, and then presented it as a portal, and then tried to find signals and sell
mm.
these signals to venture capitalists. Um, so there was a little bit of buzz around it because I think it was and still is an interesting idea, and not many people were doing it, and funds didn't have data teams. I mean,
Right.
and now they do, but they didn't at the time. I don't. I think there was like a sort of a bang. There was like a big sort of like people were interested, and we sold some licenses, but it didn't really sort of have like the nice hockey stick shaped curve that we wanted.
And still, no one has really done this, to my knowledge, at least. Like, why do you think that it just never happened?
Well, the data is super noisy, right? So
Mm,
early stage data is incredibly noisy, right? If you think of like self-reported, incentivized to exaggerate, maybe it's a hard thing to predict, right? Like there's a bunch of randomness, right? In hindsight, it's easy to be like this girl's a winner, right? But like I don't know
hmm
if in the moment you actually know that.
Right.
Um, and then our customers were venture capital firms who were not at the time accustomed to paying for software, even if it was like
Hmm.
£500 a year or something. It wasn't terribly expensive. They didn't want to spend £50 a month or whatever. And it was sort of it was 15 years ago, so it was like fledgling. There wasn't that many funds either.
Right.
So I think maybe that's why it failed. But I know big funds are doing this sort of thing. And then sort
Yes.
of yeah, and then at the higher, at sort of down the road as companies get bigger, then it becomes much easier to analyze things, right? I mean, if you have stuff like revenue and like customers
Right.
and like SaaS models, or I guess particularly like more easier to maybe model out.
Yeah, I think some funds are doing this kind of internally, and they probably have more robust data sets internally as
Yeah,
well that they just wouldn't want to share in the public domain. So maybe that's the kind of fundamental asymmetry of an idea like that. So that I think you're very kind of visionary on that, but maybe there's like it was too too skewed from like the incentive perspective. But anyway, I derailed you off of your story. So
yeah. So in as the company was folding, I was at a tech conference in Paris, and I met Demis Hassabis behind backstage, and
mm,
he had just sold his company to Google. He had not won a Nobel Prize. He was not a
right.
household name.
It wasn't
uh,
the Demis Hassabis that we know today.
no, no, he was just some guy backstage, and I nervously came up to him, and then I told him I was from Toronto, and he strangely knew quite a bit about the city and quite a bit about the University of Toronto. And I, he knew a lot about the university because he had been poaching the talent from the Jeff
Mm.
Hinton lab, and that was sort of a wacky thing because I also had Jeff Hinton as a professor, and I think the course was called Introduction to Neural Networks,
Oh
and
wow.
he had not won a Nobel Prize either.
Yeah.
I feel a lot like Forrest Gump. Like I sort of
Right. Yeah, you're the
fall
Forrest
into
Gump
these
of deep learning.
situations. Um, so when I was a student in the early 2000s, Jeff Hinton was some like an eccentric British professor. He was not even the most famous computer science professor on campus,
Mm.
and uh, I took the course because I thought it was interesting. I didn't think it was sort of in a weird state at the time. Uh,
Mm.
it was like it was like in the AI winter. I
It
mean, we
was
didn't
one of the
know
AI
that.
winters. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is an interesting course, and it'd probably be fun to take. Um, so after that conversation, and after learning, sort of, I felt a little foolish that there was this sort of great AI deep learning explosion happening in my hometown. I moved back
Huh.
to start a company.
Wow.
Uh,
So that one conversation that was the spark.
um, I mean, I sort of read more about it, and it was sort
Mm.
of in, I guess AlexNet had happened 3 years before, or a few years before, and people I respected were sort of like taking this thing seriously,
Right.
and there were like a flurry of little acquisitions now, like in at the time they were probably big acquisitions, but kind of little acquisitions where big tech companies were showing up with suitcases full of money. We're flying to Canada and showing up with suitcases full of money to like acquire people who were connected with this lab or tangentially connected with this lab. So,
Yeah.
uh, and remember, they some of these people were like friends of mine, right? Like we put them all on pedestals now, but they were just people from
Yeah.
like nerds from the neighborhood, and like it wasn't like they were like unapproachable, heroes, deep learning
Did they
leaders.
have did they have not at that stage yet, but did they have this vision of what the technology is? I mean, you can't underestimate how much of what's going on now in AI and all of the craziness stems from this one lab, this one Jeff Hinton lab in Toronto. And I'm curious if they had the force, any of the foresight, or if it's just, hey, this is an interesting problem I'm going to work on academically, or there was like, okay, this will transform the world and it'll, make the markets move and have a lot of money chasing it, et cetera.
I can only guess. I only have like I don't have firsthand information. It seemed from everyone I've talked to, from it was definitely sort of faith based. He had been hacking at it for like 20 years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of randomness and luck in the universe, right? So there was a, sort of a research organization in Canada that for one reason, SciFar, right, which
Yeah.
they do
Yeah.
the little they have data sets. Yeah, they supported his work. I think they have a mandate to support. They pick like half a dozen things and they make long-term investments in them. And they supported his work when, remember, it was uncool for a very, very long time. From what I know, it's just like stubborn persistence. Like
Hmm.
eventually this is going to work. I doubt that they had dreams of riches. One of the most persuasive things was there's this the ImageNet challenge. They plotted out like the error rate, right?
Hmm.
And I'm sure you can look it up, but it's like there's a huge jump. So it gets incrementally better, or the error gets smaller every year, little bit by little bit. And then in 2012 with AlexNet, there's a huge jump. Okay. And it was the first year that they applied deep learning to it. And then every subsequent year, it gets better and better. And every subsequent year, they're just using deep learning, right? So this is like a
Mm.
clear, like, this works, at least for like classifying images of dogs and cats and buses and stuff. I think a bunch of skeptics were like, well, it'll work here, but maybe not in other places.
Mm.
And then they were applying it to other places and it started working there and there and there and there. And by the time I had moved back to Canada, there was like a clear momentum that things were
Right.
going.
And
Also,
that's a great environment to start a company in.
yeah, it was. I mean, I thought we'll see how this goes, and I actually kept my flat in London for like a
Just in
good five
case.
months, just in case. I thought this might not work. I'll have to move back. But there were just more and more signals that was working. Also, interestingly, the name of the company, we changed the name of the company to Dessa, but the original name of the company, uh, what we I was sort of obsessed with top level domains, and I
Hmm.
found that the Nigerian top level domain was .ng.
Okay.
So so I got deeplearnnai.ng. And
That's a that's
yeah,
a valuable domain now.
well, now Block owns it. It was
Mm.
acquired as part of the
Right.
acquisition.
That
If
was
you
part
look
of
it
the
up,
IP that they got. Yeah.
absolutely. If you look up the who is, it's owned by Block Incorporated.
All right. I hope they're doing something
Yeah.
clever with it. And we mentioned AlexNet a few times, or you mentioned it.
Yeah.
You know Alex, the Alex of AlexNet. Is that right?
One of my co-founders actually knew him in like middle school and high school, like they were best buddies. And he's a very interesting guy. He's a very humble guy who unleashed this thing on the world.
Yeah. Does he have this like sense of the grandiosity of everything that has his name on it that initiated this whole technological wave?
He's a very down-to-earth guy, and it must be very strange. It must be very strange to be famous in that way, to have like
Right.
done something when you're like 25, like as a as a master student, and like from what I understand, it was like assigned to him, like, hey, you should try this on images and see what happens. And he was like super super gifted at like CUDA, and like
Mm.
knew like was really down, like really into the code, right, into like the CUDA code.
Right.
And so I believe there was like a strong intuition that this thing will be solved, but it was sort of the magic of him really knowing CUDA inside and out. So it's got to be weird for him. It's got to be weird for him. I don't know
Yeah,
how
for
you I
sure.
don't know like how you live with, like, how do you like make sense of that?
Yeah, you see your name on something that was like very, very consequential for
In
probably world history. Yeah.
every single paper cites like there's like 200,000 citations or something, and
Right.
it's like
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
um yeah, it must be insane. It must be like kind of nuts to follow
And
that.
and when you were starting your company, Deep Learning,
Right.
which became Dessa, what was the original application that you were trying to use deep learning on?
Excellent question. I mean, there wasn't really a strong thesis other than this is cool, and I know some really smart people who would like to like and we can work on cool things. Toronto's like the financial center of Canada, and it had some very very big banks. It's not a particularly clever business strategy. It was like these banks are big and rich, and there's probably lots of applications that we can attack. So the first thing that we did that was successful was using deep learning for credit card collections,
Hmm.
specifically who and when to target for the banks. This was sort of, I mean, 10 years ago. So I had to describe what deep learning was.
Mm.
I had to describe what a GPU was. I had to figure
Right.
out, we had like really great relationship with NVIDIA from the very beginning.
Mm.
And we had to bring them in to explain why they need these clients. We need to buy GPUs. We had to collect and clean data sets, and like there was no infrastructure in place for deep learning.
So there was a lot of education that was required, but were people also skeptical, or did they believe that there was some magic in, the AI? How are you kind of selling it to them?
There was sort of two different camps. So there was definitely a camp of skeptics. The line was like, I've seen AI before. We did it in the
Mm.
'80s, or like I've this is just you're just rebranding big data. Remember,
Yeah,
big data was sort of a thing.
that was a big thing. Yeah.
Um, and but then there was also sort of a bunch of optimism and like this is something new and it can help us out. The most sort of persuasive thing in the slide deck was like this DeepMind video of they're playing like Space Invaders. It's like a reinforcement learning.
Right. I remember that one. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then so it sucks, and then it is like a caption that's like after 2 weeks of training, and then it's like making these superhuman moves. Like it's using it like
Mm.
it's superhuman in that it beat the best players at Space Invaders or whatever the game was, and
Right.
it's like making these clever moves and showing that to the executives at these banks was like,
Wow.
yeah. So
So you use the DeepMind videos as advertising for what you were doing, even though the
like,
application was
yeah, yeah,
completely
yeah.
different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was like this is sort of the stuff. I didn't present it as our own thing.
Sure. Yeah,
It
yeah,
was like
yeah. Of
look
course,
at
yeah.
this crazy research that's going on, and
Hmm.
imagine what could be unleashed if we
And
did
they
it.
they were persuaded by that.
Yes, yes. Now, definitely, sort of many executives were persuaded by it. There was a bit of sort of friction. There are existing collection models. There are existing sort of for everything we did. There was an existing model that was made by a statistician who had a
Yeah.
job, who was proud of their
Right.
model, who had a
Right. Right. Right.
team whose job was to
Yeah.
update the model, who used
Mm.
things like SAS, and who sort of were educated in, they had degrees in statistics or operations
Yeah.
research or things like that. So,
Yeah.
there was a bunch of navigating, like,
Mm.
what could be a disruptive technology, which is disruptive in that hopefully it moves the needle in terms of metrics and saves money, makes money, whatever it is, but also disruptive in that like this looks like it's threatening to my job fiefdom
Right.
at this large organization. So yeah.
And did they have a say in adopting your tool, or were they a blocker? How did you interact with the kind of traditional modeling groups at these organizations?
I mean, for the most part, we brought them along, right? I mean, and this was sort of frustrating, sort of a lesson learned. Everyone was like keen to just get in there and like write some code and make something awesome, but like a lot of work had to go into showing them videos of Space Invaders and building this infrastructure as well, right? Like,
Mhm.
so it's not only that like at the time banks didn't know what a GPU was, but like it's a complicated like procurement system at a bank,
Right.
right? They have to
Yeah.
approve vendors, right? And
I
that
mean,
takes
still
months.
today. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, now you have to approve a new class of vendor, right? At the time, in 2015, even I thought NVIDIA was like a video game company. They sold like cards for gamers.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And I'm sure like that's what most people thought. So again,
And
NVIDIA was not the big trillion-dollar company it was back
yeah,
then.
yeah, yeah. Everything just exploded since then. I think you know, points of fame for your company, I think what put you on the map for a lot of people was this kind of deep fake Joe Rogan clip. Can you tell the story of how you were maybe the first popular deep fake in the world? I don't know if it was the first, but it definitely was one of the most popular ones at the time.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So we hired all these amazing young people, and we told them they're going to change the world through deep learning. And we really wanted to change the world. Like we really were passionate
Mm,
about the technology. But like to pay the bills, we made credit card collection models
right.
for banks that were 150 years old. And as a way to sort of help people with that disconnect, we we encouraged them to work on their own sort of passion projects.
Mm,
And we had a bunch of GPUs. I think we had the first DGX in Canada. I think we had the first DGX outside of the US. And we allowed folks to work on what they wanted to in a very random
mm.
and unstructured way. Like it wasn't it wasn't like the sort of 20% time. It was like yeah, do the work that we have to do, and then however long you want to go nuts. I think the original idea was they wanted to make a full podcast of Joe Rogan talking maybe to Richard Feynman, some
Huh,
physicist who was no longer alive.
right.
And they wanted it to be fully interactive. So
Wow.
like the idea was that it wasn't scripted. So the ambition was super high. And they worked on it for a long time. The choice of Joe Rogan was interesting. So he has 3-hour podcasts, and he has like at the time I think 1,000 episodes. So there's like 3,000. And they were all on YouTube. And they had a transcript. Like you could download the transcript from YouTube, the kind of
Right.
YouTube
Mm,
generated transcript, and which gives you an interesting training set. The first thing I think they worked on was just like mimicking the Joe Rogan voice, and it took a long time, and it sounded like crap for a very long time. And they found a GitHub repo with this sort of kid in Tunisia, this like 22-year-old kid in Tunisia.
huh.
And they were just like emailing him, and he was emailing back. And he had implemented the Tacotron paper in PyTorch or something, or I don't know. But it was a kid in Tunisia that they
Wow.
were just emailing back and forth. And then one of the engineers who worked for us was like, "We got to hire this kid."
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we persuaded this kid to, I think he was between his, like had not finished school yet. He had like to submit a thesis. And I don't think he'd ever been out of Tunisia.
Right.
So he moved to Canada in January,
Wow.
and
A little weather shock.
yeah, slept on one of the co-founders' couches before he could like find a place for like a while. And a few months after that, there was like this day where we're listening to the output of the model, where it just like it's just like clicked, where it's like, this sounds fantastic.
Wow.
And then they put it on the internet. They made a silly video that's about 3 minutes long, and I think 3 million people saw it in a day, and every news organization wrote about it. And I think it was kind of random that it was Joe Rogan, but it was also weirdly fortuitous. So there had been deepfake things in the past. They would use either Trump or Obama usually.
Right.
And so this was written about in the tech press, but it was also written about in sort of the like MMA press.
Right.
So
The
like
the
it
manosphere. Yeah.
exposed, yeah, it exposed it to like this whole like mainstream world, or
Mm,
like it was no longer sort of in the world of like tech geeks. And then someone called me. It was like, I got the New York Times on the line. It's just like, it's not just the New York Times. It's like, it's David Barstow, who's like the 4-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Like he's got the most Pulitzer Prize, and he's like, "We're gonna put you on the cover of the New York Times. This is
oh
gonna destroy
wow.
democracy. You need to take the." And they're like, "What's next?" And I'm like, "Well, we gotta yeah, put an image to the voice, and we're working on it now. And they're like, well, let's get some cameras up and follow you for a summer. Uh,
Really?
and yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they were up there for a good 6 months, like following the progress.
Wow.
Um,
Where did that output? Was that like a documentary or a
yeah, yeah,
story
yes,
or?
yeah. It was on it was a New York Times documentary that it ran in November of 2019. And they interviewed Adam Schiff, who is ironically my congressman now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was a crazy time. It was a crazy time.
That I mean, I and how did that affect the business? Well, one right before that, what happened to the Tunisian
Oh,
developer that you hired?
oh, he we gave him a full time. He flew back to Tunisia for a little bit to finish his degree, and he incorporated some of the work he did into his thesis. And
Makes
I don't
sense.
think his advisor knew who Joe Rogan was. And it must have been crazy if he's like, where have you been for the last 6 months? Oh, I've been the feature of a New York Times documentary.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and he came back and he's yeah. So
And okay, and then did that open doors for you guys? Was it
yeah,
a distraction? Like what happened
both.
after that from a company perspective?
Both. Um, we had a thriving business, but and we'd raised maybe $10 million up until that point. But there was a lot of sort of bespoke work, a lot of sort of
Hmm.
uh, the banks really appreciated. I mean, we learned how to work with them,
Yeah.
and like got good at like navigating the politics and delivering something. But that isn't scalable, right? So it sort of didn't really work with our investors who had big dreams of what we would do. So we were trying to convert at the time to like a more sort of self-serve product.
Hmm.
And then yeah, every like all the people were like beating a path to our door for this voice model, which was a research project, which would take a while to commercialize, which worked in one use case. It worked well for 3 minutes on one use case, but it would take a while to make it robust and even longer to make it into a product. And it was unclear. Guys like 11 Labs or,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great business, right? But we didn't really have that. We had an
You were
early,
building from scratch,
yeah,
basically. The infrastructure and a lot of the progress hadn't been made yet that you could build something very robust and repeatable with this type of synthetic voice
yeah,
uh, application.
yeah. And I mean, the cr- crazy requests came in. Um, this one you won't believe. The Wu Tang Clan. I promise. I promise. The Wu Tang Clan contacted us because they wanted to. I think they wanted to like fake the voice of Old Dirty Bastard who had passed away. Like a lot of the use cases were actually quite touching. Like most of them weren't from the Wu Tang Clan. They're for
Right.
like people who had lost family members, and they're
Yeah.
like, I want to hear my dad's voice. I want to hear my grandma's voice." Um, uh, but we didn't really lean into it. We had this sort of franchise business that was going, and we're trying to pivot it into something more scalable. And then what happened was in that buzz of the whole Joe Rogan thing, there 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 was a bunch of interest in sort of Silicon Valley in acquiring the company
Mm.
for the deep learning talent, and we we sold the company to Jack Dorsey at Block, and the companies were called Square at the time. In the throes, like in the at the end of 2019, and the deal was done in 2020.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it really is an amazing story, and it kind of brings you to today as well with Pickford, which is the next iteration of deep learning. I missed your premiere in London a few weeks ago. I was in the US, unfortunately, but I've heard a lot about it. And yeah, I'd love to get your take on like what Pickford is and what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So the seeds of that were planted again in the sort of Joe Rogan brouhaha. So we got a lot of sort of interest from Hollywood, and the original application was just like international dubbing or fixing voices, fixing lines
Mm.
without having to bring the actors back, which seemed like very cool that they could do that. And obviously, it was 5 years ago, so things have progressed quite a bit. But I had been thinking about it and thinking about like the knowing that things would get better and better, knowing that the technology would get better and better, and that it'd be far broader than just voices,
Mm.
right? And so I moved my family to Los Angeles because it seemed like the most exciting thing is like human creativity.
Right.
Like how do we like for me that's the most highest form of intelligence,
Mm.
right? It's really about artificial intelligence. Then then the most exciting thing to work in is like figuring out how to make us more intelligent, right? Or make us more creative, or like augment our creative powers. Now, there are lots of folks in Hollywood exploring using generative AI as a way to reduce costs and speed up
Yeah.
times of production, and that makes lots of sense. So I had that experience in 2019 and sold the company in 2020, and then in the subsequent 4 years, there's been this explosion of this thing called generative AI, which much bigger than just like faking voices, right?
Yeah.
Don't need to explain the insanity. For me, that AI is a tool as transformative as the motion picture camera, and I think just like the motion picture camera created a new genre,
Mm.
one we take for granted.
Hmm.
Um, I think that AI will be used not just like the 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 uninspiring side of the problem is to make things cheaper.
Right.
The exciting part is like, what's the new medium?
Make things
And
new.
I think yeah, and I think it's like, well, if you in a world where you can generate anything, assets, stories, voices, faces, character movement in real time, then that gives you the power to like have the crowd interact with the story more and have
Mm.
the story, respond back. And that's powerful. And I think it also harkens back to like the ancient sort of storytelling sitting around a fire,
Mm.
which was truly sort of interactive, where the kind of the storyteller is feeding off the energy of the crowd, and the crowd
Right.
is moving back, and then there's back and forth. That's what we're trying to do. Early days, it's a year old, and yeah, we just had our first showing at BAFTA in London a couple weeks ago.
And
Which is
so
cool.
the technology in a way is taking us back to our roots of how we originally told stories. And one of the things that you mentioned, it makes me think of, you mentioned the motion picture camera. When they invented it, originally what they were doing was they were just filming plays, which were kind of static. It's a kind of a two-dimensional way of representing a story. And then only after a little bit they realized, hey, actually we can make a real movie. It doesn't need to be just kind of filming things on a stage. And so AI in a way is kind of building this new type of media that we don't even know exactly what it's going to look like. But Pickford is like one of the pioneers of inventing what that media is.
That is the big, hairy, audacious goal. Not only did the sort of grammar of film, again, things we totally take for granted, like panning,
Mm.
cut shot, flashback, like a musical montage, all of these things, right, were invented. But the whole infrastructure around film was invented. Like the award show,
Right.
right? I think it's the Oscars next week. Those are invented, right? The concept of a film critic
Mm.
is invented. Um, so not only is the hope like there's a new interesting form, but then there are all these sort of peripheral things that come out of it, and I don't know what they are, but it's exciting to explore it.
And I'm curious because the premiere that you had at BAFTA, it was a
Yeah,
live event and a lot of people interacting with the story. and what I understand is kind of this AI generated story where the audience can chime in and it can adapt it in real time. Do you imagine this to bring back to these kind of more uh, live showings, or is the main idea for Pickford to be similar to Netflix, where you're consuming it at home? What is the actual like media for the person in this scenario?
So, interesting question. It works better. It's way more fun in person.
Mm.
Now, I'm not sure why. It was fun at BAFTA when everyone's dressed up in fancy dresses and tuxedos and there's champagne, but it's also fun in a basement. We've done it in people's basements with they're around the family TV and they're sitting on the couch and there's like four of them. Um, I think it's about hearing other people laugh. I think it's maybe we have like a dearth of in-person
Mm.
experiences now. It does pose a problem for scaling, right? If that were all it were, but we're trying to incorporate some of that into the remote showings.
Is this a way to kind of bring back in-person entertainment? Because now movie theaters are kind of dying, and live shows are they were the most popular form of entertainment 100 years ago, going to the theater. Do you imagine like Pickford as a way to kind of bring community into entertainment in some capacity?
I know it works way better in person. It's way more fun. It's fun to hear other people laugh. It's fun to see, just be in the same place and you feel like you're experiencing something with other people. There is something weird and magical about it, and it works. It worked at BAFTA where people were wearing tuxedos and dresses and drinking champagne, but it also works in basements with families around TVs. I mean, both are fun in their own way. It obviously would pose a potential problem for scaling, but we're trying to figure out how to have some of those
Mm.
experiences remotely. So we do remote screenings as well.
Right.
I mean, just having things like people turn off their microphone, right? Which means you can't hear people laugh.
And so, yeah, what's next for Pickford? Like, what's on the horizon for you guys? Is it on the technology side? Is it the distribution? Is it kind of understanding more of the artistry around it? I'm curious, like, how the next year is going to be for you.
I mean, it's early days. I have no idea. I felt we got a great reception at BAFTA. Every showing we've done has had a wonderful and great reception. Um, there's so much more to do. And what makes it fun is that it's a mix of sort of art and technology. We're trying to build a product and write code, but we're not trying to do it in a vacuum where we
Mm.
don't take input from people who want to tell a story. We worked on our last show. I think we had three different screenwriters. We had proper voice actors that
Mm.
took pains to record their voice well. We will be using their voice in an AI actor.
Hmm.
um, we wanted them to like emote the
Right.
character, and it's important for us to tell a good story. So, and right now it's like a sitcom, and there's like eight characters, and they're kind of stock characters, and they're in like a limited situation. So it's the beginning, and there's a thousand, infinite amount of new stories we can tell. So
Yeah,
I have no idea what the next year is.
I'm super excited about what you guys come up with. I mean, you've been at the kind of cutting edge of this stuff for now 10 years. So who knows what kind of AI and entertainment will look like in the next few years. I wanted to round it out with a few rapid fire questions. The first is not a typical one that I ask, but what was Jeff Hinton like as a professor?
Who wore sweaters? um, I had a trick. So first of all, it was like an undergraduate. I think it was a third year undergraduate class. So there was like I don't know 100 kids in the class, right? And there were two sessions. There was like a daytime session,
Mm.
was like Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then there was like an evening session, like Thursday night, like a 3 hour block.
Mm.
And I was in the evening session, and Professor Hinton would cold call the class, like ask
One of
questions.
those, yeah.
One of those, yeah. But he'd ask the same questions in the morning section and in the evening section.
Oh.
So I had a friend in the morning section, and I would just have him tell me, yeah, what the questions would be,
Right.
So I would sound smart.
Oh,
I'm
so
gonna have
so
it.
maybe if he chose you more, he would have been like, you should join my group, and then you would have had
Yeah.
Stephen Net versus Alex Net.
Right. 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 Actually, timing is crazy. So he had, he had a bunch of grad students. Like you'd meet. We were working at these banks in Canada, and you'd meet people who did their PhD at the Hinton Lab, right? And
Mm,
in the year 2000, or not 2012, but 2002, let's say, 10 years before, and they'd have like a great job at
right.
the bank and doing risk models
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
not doing deep learning, just using their brain power.
Right.
And then had you been the same student
Yeah.
in 2012, you would,
You found
be a
OpenAI.
co-founder of.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Literally. Yeah.
yeah. Literally, you would have been one of the guys who tried to fire Sam Altman. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm curious, like, what advancement in AI are you the most excited about now?
So, like, very selfishly, what I am looking for, because I mean, I think it's cool and it's pertinent to our business, is like 3D scene generation, kind of full
Mm,
sort of. So, and there are folks doing that. There was actually uh, there's a lab at the University of Toronto
there it is.
doing some great work, and like Nvidia's doing great work. But like, imagine sort of these images in like Midjourney or DALI, right? You type something in and you get this beautiful image. Imagine that in 3D, and imagine not just since in 3D, but it's sort of fully rigged, and you could like put it into a game
Wow.
engine. And for our business, that would be great. And there are definitely sort of little bits of that, right,
It,
that are happening.
and it'll get there too. I mean,
For
we're
sure.
still at
Yeah.
the early days. Which brings to my last question. What does AGI mean to you?
Yeah, I don't have a good definition. Um, and it seems to be like one of these moving targets,
Mm,
right? So one of the things we did after the initial buzz of the Joe Rogan thing is like we had this website called Rogan versus Fogan, and it was like things like clips we took from his real voice versus like
uh,
clips that we
I
generated,
see.
and we scored people on them, and we're being and it was you couldn't tell the difference, which is like the Turing test, and like
Right.
so. But I mean, one thing that would be nice is like we have this idea of creativity. This like certain people can write songs that like resonate. Certain people can draw or sing or whatever, and that comes from like a magical place
Mm,
somewhere. And we talk about it in like magical terms or
mm,
even like religious
yeah.
sort of.
And
I am actually excited about that, and to me, that would be a demonstration of creativity, of
yeah.
intelligence, of general
Yeah.
intelligence. It would be way more persuasive than getting an LLM to do your taxes or
Right.
something, right? Um,
So
yeah, so that would be I guess where I would get super scared and super excited.
so when AI can really kind of plumb the depths of creativity, that would be close to AGI.
Yeah, or imagine it would do something better than our
Right.
best
Yeah.
songwriter,
Who knows what
painter.
that will
Yeah,
actually look like.
yeah.
Well, it's very exciting, and I'm sure that Pickford will be making the way to get there. Thank you so much, Stephen, the Forrest Gump of deep learning, for joining me. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, we'll be following you and the company, and super excited about what you guys come up with. So I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you very much.
All right, have a good one.